"What a failure you are," my dad spat, and tried to kick me out of Grandpa's birthday party. I exposed their favoritism. The next day, my relatives called out of the blue. I'm 28 years old, and I'm still trying to figure out what it means to feel truly accepted, especially by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Growing up, I was always in the shadow of my older sister, Megan. She was the golden child. Perfect grades, always knew what she wanted, the kind of person who had their whole life mapped out before they even hit high school. Everything came easy to her. And then there was me, constantly battling to keep up, not really understanding why I couldn't just get it the way she did. I was the screw-up in the family, the one they never really seemed to believe in. It wasn't just academics. Megan would breeze through school, always top of the class, while I barely scraped by. My mind just didn't work the same. I'd forget things, I'd procrastinate, I'd get distracted. It wasn't laziness, but that's how my parents saw it. I felt like a failure because they saw me that way. Honestly, I thought there was something wrong with me for a long time. I'd hear my parents talk about me behind my back, always disappointed, always comparing me to Megan, and it just crushed me. I kept thinking, why can't I be more like her? Why am I always the disappointment? It wasn't until I hit adulthood that I found out I have ADHD. It was like a light bulb went off. Suddenly, everything made sense, the constant disorganization, the inability to focus, the feeling like I was just spinning my wheels and never getting anywhere. But back then, as a kid, there was no diagnosis, no understanding. My parents didn't see the struggles, they just saw the results. And those results, a kid who couldn't live up to their high expectations. I guess I never really felt like I belonged in my family. My parents were both high achievers, respected professionals, the kind of people who expected success from their kids. They both excelled in their fields and made sure that was reflected in everything we did. Megan fit right into their world, no problem. But I was the black sheep, the one they had to explain away to their friends when the conversation turned to their kids. "Oh, Megan," in medical school, they'd proudly announce. And then, when it was my turn to be mentioned, it was like they didn't know what to say. I remember my dad telling me once, "You're just not trying hard enough." And he wasn't saying it in a supportive way. He said it like he had written me off completely. I wasn't good enough for him or for my mom. I started to hate myself for not being able to meet their standards. But honestly, I didn't even know what they wanted. There were never any words of encouragement, no, "Hey, you can do better," or "I'm proud of you for trying." Instead, there was always just this underlying feeling that no matter what I did, it was never enough. I couldn't remember the last time I got a good job, or "I'm proud of you" from my parents. To make matters worse, Megan was always there, always shining in front of me. We went to the same school for a while, and it felt like I couldn't escape her shadow. She would literally go out of her way to make me feel worse about myself. "God, you're such a loser," she'd say, as though I didn't already know. Her words weren't just harsh, they were like daggers. Megan would run to our parents, tattling on me, always trying to prove she was the perfect one. If she could catch me slipping, she did. It was like she was looking for ways to knock me down. And you know what? Part of me understands it now. Megan didn't have friends. She was always isolating herself, acting like she was better than everyone else, like she was above it all. People didn't like her. She had no social life, and she didn't care. But I'm sure it didn't make her feel any better to see me messing up while she got all the attention and praise. But here's the kicker. Despite her flaws, despite her awful attitude, my parents adored her. They never called her out on her behavior. In fact, they celebrated her like she could do no wrong. Every family gathering, they'd go on and on about how great Megan was. They threw her these massive birthday parties every year, big, elaborate celebrations with all the bells and whistles. She was their shining star. Me? My birthdays, not even an afterthought. Every year it was the same thing, a couple of books and a quick, happy birthday if they remembered. When it came time for college, the comparison was even more brutal. Megan graduated from one of the top universities in the country, and my parents couldn't stop bragging about it. They made it sound like she was the best thing since sliced bread. When it was my turn, I didn't get into a prestigious school. I ended up at a state school, a good one, but not the one my parents had dreamed for me. My dad barely even tried to hide his disappointment. He told me straight up, I don't have high hopes for you anymore. You should just leave, make life easier for us. And those words, they cut deep. It felt like he was telling me I was a failure, that I wasn't worth their time. So I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I cut them out. I decided that if they didn't care about me, then I wasn't going to keep showing up for them. I left, moved out, and started my life, just trying to survive on my own terms. No help, no support, just me against the world. I got a part-time job to pay for school, took out loans, and somehow I made it work. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt like giving up, but I kept going. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who actually believed in me. I made friends who cared about me, who saw my potential. They didn't see the mess-ups or failures, they saw me. And that was all I needed. That was the turning point for me. Today, I'm a solutions architect at a multinational corporation. I've built a life I'm proud of, and I haven't spoken to my parents in over 9 years. I've managed to make a name for myself, despite everything they said. But when my granddad asked me to come to his 80th birthday party, I didn't want to disappoint him. So I went. I didn't expect it to turn out the way it did, though. The second I walked into the party, I felt it. The tension, the unspoken words hanging in the air. I knew my parents would be there. I expected them to be distant, maybe even cold, but what I didn't expect was to feel so out of place. Like I didn't belong in my own family's celebration. I had come for Grandpa, not to deal with my parents' bitterness, but of course, it was inevitable. I did my best to keep it together. I greeted Grandpa first like I was supposed to. He lit up when he saw me, his face wrinkling into a smile. He hugged me so tight, I almost didn't want to let go. That's the family I want, I thought. But of course, that moment didn't last long. When I looked up, my parents were staring at me from across the room. I could see the disappointment written all over their faces. My dad's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed as if he couldn't believe I was actually there. Megan wasn't there, and for that I was grateful. But the way my parents looked at me, it was like they couldn't even see me anymore. Just the ghost of who I used to be, the failure. I told myself I wouldn't let it bother me. I tried to focus on Grandpa, but the nagging feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. And then it happened. Dad made his move. He came up to me, face like stone. "Jake," he said, his voice so cold I almost didn't recognize it. "We need to talk." I followed him to a quieter corner, away from the others, not sure what to expect. But when he turned to face me, I could see the contempt in his eyes. "What the hell are you doing here?" he asked, like I was some kind of intruder. I had rehearsed this moment in my head countless times over the years. I had imagined what I would say, how I would stand up for myself when the time came. But when it actually happened, when he stood there looking at me like I was the dirt on the bottom of his shoe, I felt the rage building up in my chest. "I came for Grandpa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He asked me to be here." Dad scoffed, shaking his head. "Don't give me that. Why haven't you come to any other family events? Suddenly, after all these years, you decide to show up." He stepped closer, his breath hot with anger. "You think you can just walk in here like everything's fine? You think we've all forgotten what a failure you are?" His words stung more than I expected. But what hurt even more was that it wasn't the first time I had heard them. It wasn't the first time they had made me feel like I didn't matter, like I wasn't worth their time. I fought back the tears threatening to spill. "I'm not a failure," I said, my voice shaking. "I've built my life, I'm doing fine, I've made something of myself." "Really?" Dad's tone was sharp, mocking. "You really expect us to believe that? You didn't even graduate from a decent school. What the hell kind of life are you trying to sell me?" That was the moment. All the years of resentment, all the hurt I had buried deep inside of me finally exploded. I was done. Done with trying to earn their approval. Done with living in their shadow. Done with being the person they told me I had to be. "You want to talk about failure?" I snapped, stepping closer to him. "You never saw me. You never bothered to try and understand what I was going through. I've struggled with ADHD my whole life, and you just sat there criticizing me like I was lazy. You never even gave me a chance, but I made it. I made my life work without you, without any help from you." Dad's face went red, and for a split second I thought he might lash out, but instead he just stared at me. "You should leave," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "People can't know you're still a failure." That was it. That was the moment that broke me. Still a failure. After everything I've done. After everything I've worked for. He could barely look me in the eye, and then, like it was nothing, he told me to leave. I didn't have words for it. I didn't know what to say. I was furious. I was hurt. But I wasn't about to let them push me around anymore. Not now. Not ever again. I pushed past him. I didn't care if I made a scene. I didn't care if it was rude. I wasn't going to be treated like that. Not anymore. I walked back into the main room, my heart pounding in my chest. Grandpa noticed right away. He saw my face, the anger and pain written all over it. He came over asking me what happened. And I didn't hold back. I told him everything. Everything that had happened, everything I had felt, all those years of being treated like I was less than. The things my parents had said, the way they'd treated me. I told him how they'd always called me a failure, how they never supported me. Grandpa was furious. He wasn't just upset, he was livid. He couldn't believe how my parents had treated me and how they were ruining his birthday celebration. He said he was going to talk to them, but I told him it wouldn't make a difference. They'd never listen. I had to do this my way, so I stood up. I grabbed my drink, tapped the glass to get everyone's attention. The room went silent and all eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath and started talking. I told everyone why I hadn't been at any family events for the past decade, why I'd stayed away, why I was never part of the family gatherings, and I told them the truth about how my parents had treated me, about how they made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I told them how I had been ostracized, how I had fought tooth and nail to make something of myself. The room was dead silent. Some people exchanged uncomfortable glances, others stared at my parents who were completely frozen, unable to defend themselves. My mom's face was as pale as a ghost. My dad looked like he was going to explode, but no words came out. I didn't stop there. I told them how, even after all my hard work, they still looked down on me. I told them how they always put Megan on a pedestal and made me feel like I was nothing. And I also exposed that I was also diagnosed with ADHD. The room was still silent after I finished speaking. My parents stood there like statues, their faces pale and frozen in shock. I could feel their anger radiating off them, but this time I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet, with nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. It was like all those years of carrying their judgment and disappointment were suddenly lifted from my shoulders. Grandpa walked over to me, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Jake," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you did the right thing. You don't deserve to carry that weight anymore." I could see the support in his eyes, the pride. For him, this wasn't just about a family feud or drama. It was about me finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of being made to feel less than. My cousins, who were quietly watching in the background, started to murmur their approval. I didn't know them that well, but seeing them nodding, even some of them clapping softly, made me realize how much I had been holding in all these years. This was a battle I had won, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever felt like the odd one out. When my parents finally spoke, it was like they had no words left to say. They tried to look composed, but the facade had cracked. They didn't know how to react to this version of me. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came out. I could see the fury building in him, the same fury I'd seen growing up every time I disappointed him. But this time it wasn't going to work. "Leave, Jake," he said finally, through gritted teeth, trying to regain control of the situation. "Leave now. You've embarrassed us enough." I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own family event again. I looked at him for a moment, and then at my mom, who was standing there, arms crossed, still cold and unmoved. The anger in me simmered down, replaced by something deeper, exhaustion. The emotional toll this relationship had taken on me over the years, the manipulation, the dismissal, it was all starting to settle into something else. I had accepted that I wasn't going to get what I wanted from them. I had people who cared about me, and that was enough. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice steady but firm. "This is my family too, and if you can't accept me for who I am, then maybe it's time we all start accepting the truth." With that, I turned my back on them and walked back to the group of relatives, who were still watching the scene unfold. I didn't know what to expect from them. Would they be angry with me for causing a scene, or would they side with my parents, seeing me as the troublemaker? But as I approached the table where some of my cousins were sitting, I was met with warm smiles and quiet nods. One of my cousins came over to me, giving me a hug. "Jake, that took a lot of guts. You didn't deserve any of that." I smiled, feeling the weight in my chest lift just a little more. For the first time, it felt like I was being seen. Like I wasn't just the screw-up in the family, but a person who deserved respect and dignity. The rest of the night was a blur. My parents left shortly after, clearly humiliated, but I didn't care anymore. I stayed and enjoyed the evening with my relatives, many of whom I hadn't seen in years. The conversations felt different, lighter. I didn't have to watch my back every time someone looked at me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. The days following the birthday party were a whirlwind of mixed emotions. The phone calls and messages from relatives started to trickle in. Most of them expressed their support, even if they hadn't fully understood what I had been through. A lot of them had no idea the extent of my parents' treatment of me over the years. They had been convinced by the facade my parents had built, one where I was the rebellious, ungrateful child. But now, with the truth out there, some of them started to see things differently. My uncle called me the day after the party. "Jake," he said, his voice a bit shaky. "I had no idea what was going on with you all these years. I'm sorry for not reaching out sooner. You didn't deserve that. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." It felt good to hear, but the person I wanted to hear it from the most still hadn't reached out. A week went by before I heard from my mom. I wasn't expecting it, but when I saw an email from her pop up in my inbox, I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest as I clicked open the message. Her words were tentative at first, but as I read on, I could feel the weight of years of regret in her apology. She admitted that she had never truly understood me, and that she had failed me as a parent. She acknowledged that she and my dad had always favored Megan, and that they had failed to recognize my struggles with ADHD. She apologized for not supporting me when I needed it the most. She even mentioned that she had been doing some therapy, trying to work through her own issues, and that my speech at Grandpa's birthday had been a turning point for her. She said she was proud of what I had accomplished in my career, and that she had been following my progress on LinkedIn. I sat there for a long time, reading and rereading the email. I didn't respond to her right away. I needed time. Time to digest everything that had happened, and time to think about what I wanted from this relationship moving forward. I hadn't forgiven her or my dad yet, but what I had done at Grandpa's birthday wasn't just about confronting my parents, it was about finally taking control of my own narrative. It was about letting go of the past and starting fresh, even if that meant leaving some relationships behind. I had built a life for myself, a life where I didn't have to beg for approval or constantly prove my worth. For the first time in years, I felt free, and that was worth more than any apology could ever be. As I sat there reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that I didn't need to change my parents. I couldn't, and I shouldn't have to. What I needed was to change how I saw myself. I needed to believe in my own worth, regardless of whether they did or not. So when the time came to respond to my mom's email, I didn't have to rush. I would take my time, and I would respond when I was ready. Because the truth was, I had already forgiven myself, and that I realized was the most important thing.